Amen. All right, as you find your seat, you can go ahead and grab your Bibles. Today we'll be in James chapter 2. James chapter 2, and we'll get there eventually, but before we get there, we'll go through a couple other things. I hope your fingers are ready to turn. We're not going to turn a whole lot, but just be ready to go to these passages we're going to be looking at today. So we just came out of spring break. Everyone enjoy spring break? Anyone have a spring break and enjoy it? Yeah, cool. All right. Well, it's cool. Spring break's always great. This is my first spring break that I had that I actually wasn't in school, so that was kind of weird. But I got to spend some time with my family, and I love spending time with my family. And my nephew, who is here this morning, he's wearing a nice bright orange shirt, so you can see him over there. Every time I go over there, it seems like he's missing more teeth. And so I'll remember my whole experience with losing teeth. It wasn't the most exciting time because my teeth were very difficult because my grown-up teeth would be moving in long before my baby teeth were ready, and my baby teeth were like, they weren't going anywhere. And so I got all kinds of weird things going on with my teeth. So if you ever look at me like, why is Kyle's teeth all messed up? That's why my baby teeth just liked staying in my mouth as long as they could. And then by the time they came out, my grown-up teeth were not moving at all. And so I was like, well, that's great. And normal people would go to the dentist, but I'm not normal because I had one experience at the dentist when I was a kid, and it wasn't the greatest experience. They're pulling out teeth that I really didn't need to be pulled out, but whatever. But I just remember going there to the dentist when I was a kid, and one of the greatest fears that I had was because I had some cavities for sure, and so they had to do some work on that. My greatest fear was being able to feel like what they're doing, like with the drills and all that stuff. I don't know if I'm the only one that has that kind of fear, but I'm a kid and I have no idea what's going on. So I show up there and they're like, all right, so here's all the work we're going to be doing. And so they tell me, so I asked the question like before they start the work, like, so are you going to like give me something where I'm not going to feel this? And like, oh yeah. And so they give us this like numbing gel stuff. Y'all know what I'm talking about? And they kind of get like a cotton swab and they like put it all in your mouth. And so they do that and he's getting ready to go and I'm still not feeling anything. And I'm like, are you sure this stuff's going to work? He's like, and I was like, how do I know if it's working? And he said, you're going to know, trust me. And so I'm just sitting there like, okay, whatever. And then over a few seconds, y'all know what happens with the numbing gel in your mouth is all of a sudden its mouth starts just getting all heavy and your speech is all slurred and you're like, oh my gosh, where did my mouth go? It's gone, you know? And so sure enough, I knew very well it was working, right? And so he was able to do all the work without me feeling it. And my mom could even tell, she was out in the waiting room, my mom could even tell that they had given me numbing gel because I walk out and she's like, hey, how'd it go? I'm like, oh, it's super great. Because I can't talk because I still got numbing gel on, right? Y'all see what I'm saying? And so she knew that I was given numbing gel. She knew that stuff was there because she could see the side effects of it. Y'all following me? Right? And so, and for the next hour or so, it's still just super numb. And everywhere I'm going, people can tell, like, hey, that dude went to the dentist because they can see the effects of that it still had on me, right? And so the thing is, with our faith, people need to be able to see the effects of it. Are y'all following me? Okay, the people need to be able to see the effects. They can't just trust that when we say that we're a Christian, they shouldn't just be able to take our word. They need to be able to see it in our life. They need to see the side effects of it, if that makes sense. Okay, and because so many times we go through being a Christian in this walk with Christ as well, I'll just show up to church. I think that's enough, and I'll just tell people I'm a Christian, and I'm hoping that that's good enough, but what true, authentic faith, you're going to know if it's true and authentic faith because you're going to be able to see the effects of it. You're going to see the side effects of it, right? And so that's what we're going to be looking at today in James chapter 2. And he's going to really hit this. And this is something we've read 1,000 times, but I feel like these tend to be the things that we kind of just shrug off when we read it. Like, oh yeah, it's a really good passage in James. We might highlight it in our Bibles or something, but are we actually really paying attention to what he's trying to tell us here? And so that's where we're going to be today. So we're talking about faith. That's the real key to our faith. And so the title of the sermon today is The Evidence of Faith. We need to be able to see the evidence of faith, not just through our words, but there needs to be something there that shows that this faith is real, that something happened, that you were given numbing gel, and people need to be able to see that happened, right? And so as we're talking about faith, the first thing that we need to understand is we just need to define faith for a second, all right? Because we like to use that word. It's a nice fancy church word, like, yeah, faith, and we might get a t-shirt that has faith on it and feel super cool, like, yeah, Christian word, faith, right? But what is faith actually? What is faith, right? And so because faith is kind of important because our entire eternity and our entire relationship with God is dependent upon faith, right? And so as we're doing this, as we're getting into this, I want us to define faith for a second. So I always like using Google to help me define things. So Google gives me 2 definitions of what faith is. And the first definition Google gives us is faith is complete trust or confidence in someone or something. Does that make sense? So faith is complete trust or confidence in someone or something. So kind of picture if you've ever gone rock climbing before, if you ever see someone that's rock climbed before, they don't just climb up a bunch of, if they're super great at it and they're super confident, sure, whatever. But normally when you rock climb, you have someone down below that's holding the rope for you. That's kind of doing the belay or whatever, right? So as you're rock climbing, what you're doing is you're putting your trust into that person. Because what if that person isn't there and you fall? What's going to happen? Yeah, exactly. So it's not going to be a very pleasant situation. So what you're doing is you're climbing on the rock wall or whatever it is that you're climbing on. You're putting your trust in that person, and you're showing that person how much you trust them. The higher you're climbing, the higher you're getting, the more trust you're putting into that person. Saying, I'm putting my trust in this confidence that this person's going to hold me up and keep me from falling to my death, right? And so that's the first definition of faith, is you're putting your complete confidence and your trust into someone or something. And for us, we're putting our trust and our confidence in God, right? The other definition it gives us is faith is a strong belief in God and in His Word based on spiritual apprehension rather than physical proof. And so this, again, is the epitome of our relationship with God. We have a relationship with someone that we haven't physically seen with our own eyes. We're taking His Word and we are calling it, and we're saying that His Word is truth. And I'm basing my entire life around this foundation, even though I haven't physically seen this with my own eyes. Does that make sense? Because if you have seen God face to face, you would not still be breathing, because God is so holy and we can't take in all of His holiness and we wouldn't be there. So again, our entire relationship with God is dependent upon faith. So how does faith tie in with our salvation? If you want to turn to Ephesians chapter 2 real quick. Keep your finger in James. We'll be there in a second. But turn to Ephesians chapter 2. And we'll be in verses 8 through 9. And so Paul writes this letter to the church in Ephesus here. So we're going to look at how does our faith tie into salvation? Because a lot of times that's what we kind of tie the two together and say, well, my faith in God, what does that mean? Okay? And Paul's going to help us out with that. So this is Ephesians 2, verses 8 through 9. And Paul starts off by saying, you are saved by grace through what? Faith. Right. You were saved by grace through faith. And so in our salvation, he starts off saying that you were saved by grace. So what are we being saved from? Okay, we're being saved from our sin. Romans 3:23 makes it very clear that we are all sinners. We all fall short of the glory of God. We all do things that go against what God wants for us. Every one of us is guilty of that. And Romans 6:23 tells us that the wages of sin, what we deserve for our sin, is what? Is death, is eternal separation from God. That's our punishment. That's what we deserve. And we are all guilty and deserving of that punishment. But where salvation comes in is Romans 5:8, when God says He demonstrated His love for us. He loved us so much that He didn't want us to have to deal with that punishment. So He gave us a way out. He gives us Jesus. And Romans 5:8 says God demonstrates His love for us by sending His Son Jesus, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And as Christ died for us, He took our punishment so that we don't have to go through that. He saved us from our punishment. Okay, is that making sense? Y'all following me here? You're like, well, I've learned that my whole life. Well, sometimes it's nice to just be reminded of what our salvation is, so we're not just going around saying something that we don't really understand what we're doing. And so he says that you were saved from your punishment of sin and death through Jesus. He said you were saved saved by grace. What does that word grace mean? Word grace can be defined as you receiving something that you don't deserve, okay? Or in God's case, God is giving you something that you don't deserve. And so what is God giving us that we don't deserve? It's salvation. We don't deserve salvation. We are guilty as can be in this situation. And God's, through His grace, being gracious to us, makes no sense to us, and we don't deserve it one bit. But God shows His grace and His love for us by sending Jesus to die for us. Now we are receiving something that we don't deserve. And it makes it clear through the rest of that verse that we don't deserve this grace. We don't deserve the salvation, because he says you're saved by grace through faith, and this is not from yourselves, it's God's gift. You did nothing to do that. This is God's gift, not from your work, so that no one can boast. And so he makes it very clear, you did nothing to earn this, and you can do nothing to earn it. And because we make it clear to God every single day that we don't deserve this salvation. We don't deserve this gift because we are all sinners, and we keep doing this every single day. We're sinning and sinning and sinning, and we prove that every day. And so it's not by our works, it's not by anything that we do that we're saved. It's all through what Christ has done for us. Is that making sense? Okay? And so you were saved by grace, not by your works, not by anything. You cannot be a good enough person. You cannot work hard enough to get there. You are saved by God's gift and His grace. Okay? And that kind of trumps the whole argument when people say, well, I'll get to heaven because I'm a good person. A lot of people believe that logic. And we're going to talk about how flawed that logic is here in a little bit. But this verse right here completely just throws that out in the water, because there's nothing you can do. You cannot be a good enough person to receive this gift. That's why it's a gift. That's why you're receiving something you don't deserve. So he says, so you're saved by grace, and this is where faith comes in, through faith. And so where does faith come into this? And what we're doing with our faith is we are using the definition Google gave us, is we're putting our complete trust and our complete confidence in God's hands. We're putting our entire life and giving it to God, saying, you know what to do and you can take care of me better than I can. Okay? You are putting your trust and your life in His hands. I think of the movie Toy Story 3. If y'all have seen Toy Story 3, they're making another one for some reason. I don't know. But Toy Story 3 I thought was a good way to end it, because if you know the story, you got these toys like Woody and Buzz and everybody. They're Andy's toys. So Andy, as a kid, is playing with these toys. And as the series of Toy Story goes on, Andy's getting older and older. And the third one, he's going to college. And what he recognizes in the movie is that he's not able to take care of these toys and give the toys the attention and care that they need. Right? So he's recognizing that because he's older and he's doing other stuff now, that he can't take care of these toys the way that he would want to. And he cares about them. He's had 2 whole movies with them, right? So he cares about these toys. But he recognizes that I can't take care of them as well as I used to. And what he decides to do, spoiler alert if you haven't seen Toy Story 3 yet, sorry. What he does is at the end of the movie, he gives his toys away. He gives them to this little girl. And as he's doing that, he tells her, like, hey, I care about these toys. I really like these toys. I want you to take good care of them. And what he's doing is he's handing over his toys and putting them in her hands and saying, I'm trusting that you can take care of these toys better than I can. Is that making sense? I'm trusting that you can give them the attention they need. I'm trusting that you can take better care of them than I can. And that's a picture of what we're doing with our salvation. We're giving our lives to Christ, and we're saying, I'm trusting that you can take better care of me than I can. Y'all with me? I can't do this. I can't do this on my own. I can't be a good enough person. I just keep falling and falling and falling. And so I'm going to put my life in your hands and trust that you can take better care of me. Okay? And that's where that faith comes in, is you're putting that trust, your entire life, in His hands. Okay? And so if you go to James chapter 2, where we're at today, James opens up in this first verse, in verse 14, he opens up with a curious question for us. And the question that's going to set up the entire thing of what we're talking about. James 2, verse 14. And James, just so you know, is the author of this, is Jesus' brother, his earthly brother. So I guess technically his half-brother. And so James is writing this letter here. In verse 14, he says, what good is it, my brothers, if someone says he has faith but does not have works? Can his faith alone save him? And so he brings up this question. Okay, so we understand what faith is. And so he says, is it enough to just have faith? Or is there a little bit more to it than that? That's kind of the question that he's introducing here. Okay, and he brings up the topic of works. And just to make it clear right off the bat, is he's not saying that your works, that you have to work your way to receive that salvation. He's saying once you have received that salvation, once you receive that gift and that faith is real, there should be something that comes after. These works should now be resulting from this faith. If this thing actually happened, if this is real, then something should be coming from that. Okay? So he's saying this is what true authentic faith looks like, is it's producing something. And what it's producing is it's going to produce good works. And in a nice churchy phrase, it's going to produce fruit. Okay? Have y'all heard that before? The fruit of the Spirit. We need to produce fruit. We're going to talk about that if you haven't heard that yet. So what if we've heard the phrase of like fruit of the Spirit? So what does that mean? So the whole thing with that is when we give our lives to Christ, when we make Jesus Lord of our lives, and we're saved, we receive what? Talk to me. What do we receive when we get saved? The Holy Spirit. Yes, so we receive the Holy Spirit when we were saved, and He begins living and dwelling in our lives, and kind of just confirming that salvation was real, because that's when you don't receive Him before you're saved. Some people believe, and you receive that when you give your life to Christ. And when He enters into your life, the Holy Spirit begins working, and His function is He's transforming and renewing your mind and sanctifying, making you more and more like Christ, helping you understand God's Word, revealing His truth to you and helping you understand it, illuminating that in your life. And what He's doing is there's going to be things that He's producing in His life, and He's making His presence known in that. I don't know if you know of someone who anywhere they go, that they make their presence known. Y'all know what I'm talking about? If y'all remember James Pritchard, anybody remember James? James is a dude, and this is not, I'm not saying this is an insult by any means. James is a dude that he makes his presence known everywhere he shows up. And I think y'all know what I'm talking about, because he's not like a super shy, quiet person. He is a very loud man, and you can tell he's here based on his laugh. Y'all remember his big old laugh? He's like, ha, 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 and it's just booming across the entire building. And you can be all the way down in the nursery and hear him laugh, and you can be like, oh, hey, James is here. Y'all know what I'm saying? And so he makes his presence known everywhere he goes, and he's still like that. Love James, by the way, okay? And so everywhere he's going, he's making his presence known, and that's what the Spirit does in our lives. It's not a question of, hey, have you seen the Holy Spirit? Is Holy Spirit here today? Like it's He makes His presence known. He makes it evident, hey, I'm here. Look, I'm here. You can tell that I'm here. And as He's doing that, that's helping us in our confidence in our faith, helping us know that we're truly saved because we have the Spirit. And He also makes His presence known by producing this fruit in our lives. That's where we get into Galatians 5, where Paul talks about the fruit that the Spirit is producing are things like love and joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Those are the things that the Spirit is producing in our lives. And notice, if you see those, I don't know if we have the words on there or not, but the list of those things in Galatians, the fruit of the Spirit, again, love, joy, peace, patience, all those things, notice that those are actions. Those are not just suggestions. They're not like descriptions of things. They are actions. Love, joy, patience, self-control. These are things that are actions that we are to be living out. And that's what the Spirit is producing within us to do that. And so how do we keep producing this fruit? It's found in John chapter 15, if you want to turn there real quick. Again, keeping your finger in James. But turn to the book of John chapter 15. And this is Jesus preaching here. He's speaking to His disciple. He's preaching here in chapter 15, and I'm going to start here in verse 5, and we're going to read verses 5 through 8. And Jesus says, I am the vine, and you are the branches. The one who remains in me, and I in him, produces much fruit, because you can do nothing without me. If anyone does not remain in me, he is thrown aside like a branch, and he withers. They gather them, throw them into the fire, and they are burned. If you remain in me, and my words remain in you, ask whatever you want, and it will be done for you. And this is important right here. My Father is glorified by this, that you produce much fruit and then prove to be my disciples. Y'all catch that? How do you prove that you are His disciples? You bear fruit. You produce fruit. I don't know if you've caught it yet, but I like if you talk back to me, all right? So don't be scared. Like, produce fruit. Like, yell it, shout it really loud, okay? So that's the thing. How do you prove to be His disciples? You do what? Produce fruit. Come on. All right. So so as you're doing that, how do we produce fruit? Is you remain connected to the vine. The vine is the life source. It's what's producing the life that's allowing these things to grow and be produced in your life. Does that make sense? Okay. And He says, if you're a branch that gets disconnected from the vine, you're good for nothing. You are disconnected from the life source, and you are good for nothing now. And all you're good for is being gathered up and thrown into a fire. And that's not just a coincidence that He uses that illustration of being thrown into a fire there, if you catch that. But the point that He's trying to get, and you see that, He says, you can do nothing apart from me. There is nothing you can do if you're not connected to me. All right? Which means that all the work that we do apart from Christ is meaningless. So what about these people who are doing a lot of really good works and really good deeds? If it's not being produced by God, then it's meaningless. You're just kind of wasting time in a sense. All right? Because if you are remaining connected to the vine, that's the way that you have life, and that's what's going to be producing this fruit. The second you get disconnected from it and you try to produce your own stuff, when you see a branch that gets connected from a tree, it's not able to grow anymore. It's not able to produce anything. It's disconnected from it. And so He says, if you want to produce fruit, you have to remain connected to the vine. And then this last verse before we go back to James is in Luke chapter 6. So turn there real fast. This is the last time we'll turn somewhere, I promise. All right, so Luke chapter 6. Jesus, again, liking to use this example of fruit and trees and stuff here. And this is why fruit is so important, why bearing fruit is so important. He's going to make it clear in this passage right here in Luke 6. And this is verses 43 through 45. All right. So Jesus says this. He says, a good tree doesn't produce bad fruit, On the other hand, a bad tree doesn't produce good fruit. And that's the key right here. For each tree is known by its own fruit. Figs aren't gathered from thorn bushes or grapes picked from a bramble bush. A good man produces good out of the good storeroom of his heart. And an evil man produces evil out of the evil storeroom, for his mouth speaks from the overflow of the heart. And so go back to the beginning of that, where he says, a tree is known by its what? Its fruit, right. So the question, if you're out in your house someday and you see this tree growing up, and how do you know, well, let's say this, how do you know if an apple tree is actually an apple tree? How do you know that? There's apples growing on it. And if you see the apples growing on it, you can't point at it and be like, you know what, I think that's a pear tree. What gives it away? The fruit gives it away. It tells you like, hey, this is an apple tree. You can't just point at any random tree and be like, you know what, I think that's an apple tree. The fruit is what gives it away. All right, and that's what Jesus' point here is saying. Your fruit is going to give it away. And the way that people know that you're a tree that's a follower of Christ, that this faith is real and authentic, is based on the fruit that you're producing. Because you can try to claim to be a pear tree all you want, but the only way people are going to know that you're a pear tree is if the pears are growing on you, right? The fruit is being produced in your life. Okay? And so with that, and the reason I get into this is because we're going to see what James is getting into here, is he's going to be talking about how can you have faith if you don't have works. And these works that he's referring to are the works that are being produced by the Spirit. It's the fruit of the Spirit that's being produced in your life. Are y'all with me? Okay? Let's go back to James here. James chapter 2 verses, and we're going to be in 15 through 17 now. Okay? And so James picks up where he left off. So he asks the question, can you have faith apart from works? Is faith enough to save you? Is that good enough? And he goes into this next part here in verse 15. He says, if a brother or sister is without clothes and lacks daily food, and one of you says to them, go in peace, keep warm and eat well, but you don't give them what the body needs, what good is that? In the same way, faith, if it doesn't have works, is dead by itself. And so what James is saying here, he's showing you the picture of how meaningless your words are if they are not backed up by action. Y'all have heard that since you were kids, I think, of actions speak louder than what? Right, so y'all have heard that. Y'all know this your entire life. Actions will always speak louder than words. You can say you're going to do something all you want, but the way that people know you're serious, the way that people will believe you is when you back it up with actions. Okay? I can tell my mom I'm going to clean my room all I want, but she's not going to believe it until she sees me cleaning up my room. Okay? And that's what James is getting into here, is he's showing you how meaningless your words are if it's not going to be backed up by action. He brings up this example of someone who shows up in need, and you recognize they have a need. They need food. They need clothing. They need stuff. And he says, what good is it if you tell them, hey, here's what you need. Here's your grocery list of what you need. Let me give this to you. And yet you don't give them the stuff that they need. What good is that? It's not good for anything, right? Especially when you have the resources to give them. Telling them what they need isn't going to help them. Giving them what they need is what's going to make that evident, right? So I think of like when we had this big hurricane recently, like I think it was Hurricane Harvey or something like that. Y'all remember that, okay? And it hit Texas pretty hard, especially in the Houston area. And if you would watch the news or see stuff, you would see how these houses are just getting flooded and this entire city is just underwater. And what was really cool to see was these people from all over Texas and all over the country just coming in to help out, taking like their boats and helping pick up people who are stranded in their homes and getting them to safe places, helping provide with food and clothes and things like that. But how terrible, how horrible would it have been if these people were watching the news and they see these people in a really terrible situation and like, you know what, that person could really use my boat right now. That's really unfortunate. I guess they really need a boat, right? Or they have all this food in their pantry. Like, man, those people could really use some food here. And yet then they change the channel and do nothing about it. How terrible of a situation would that have been? Are y'all following me? That's the point James is making. It says, your words mean nothing if you're not going to back it up with actions. If you recognize there's a need in someone's life and you have the resources to help them out, you need to step up and serve. That's what we're called to do as believers, is serve. Not to be served. We're a lot of times we're too busy waiting for us to be served before we step up and try to help anyone else out. And James is saying, don't just tell them, hey, this is what you need, I'll pray for you. That's another thing that we as Christians are very quick to be like, hey, I'll pray for you. And then we completely forget about it. Y'all with me? I feel like this is something that's just super easy. We think if we tell someone we'll pray for them, that makes everything better. And I'm not saying that prayer is not powerful. Don't hear that from me. I'm saying that means that praying for them, it's not going to do anything if you're not helping them out, if you're not recognizing the need in their life and you're not helping them out and stepping up in that way. Because that's what's the difference is I've had people say they're going to pray for me, and I know that it's kind of been forgotten, but when I know that someone's really stepping up and showing me the love of Christ is when they're not just saying, I'll pray for you, and then they completely forget about it, but they're constantly coming back to me like, hey, how are you doing? Checking up with me, making sure I'm all right. And the question they always ask is like, what can I do? How can I help you out? All right? So don't just tell them you're going to pray for them if you're, first of all, not going to actually pray for them. And then two, if you're not willing to step up and give them what they need. Because we're really good at pointing at the problems. We're really good at recognizing what the problems are in our community, in our lives. And we're like, man, that's a really unfortunate situation over there. But it's a whole other story when we're called to step up and to actually do something about that. And that leads right into the problem of people needing Jesus, right? We're really good at that. Man, that person really needs some Jesus, man. That person's super lost. We're really good at pointing out that in people's lives. And we have the answer. We have Jesus in our lives. And how pointless is it for us to be like, you know what, that person really needs Jesus, if we're not going to take Jesus to them. Are y'all following me? That's what we're saying. That's the whole point James is trying to get at, is your faith means nothing if you're not going to get up and actually start to serve and use this in real life. You have the answer. You have the resource. You know they need Jesus. So don't just point at them and be like, hey, I hope you get Jesus someday. Like, go to them and help them know what it looks like to follow Christ. Live that out in your life. Because he says if he says at the end, if in the same way of faith, if it doesn't have works, it's dead. It is useless. It's good for nothing. Okay? He goes on in verse 18. He says, well, someone will say, you have faith and I have works. And so he's like, well, someone comes up to me and says, well, you have faith, I have works. Well, you just worship God a little differently than I worship God. You know, you have faith, I got works, whatever. And so what James says here, he says, so show me your faith without works, and I will show you faith from my works. Do y'all recognize the difference? He says, show me your faith without works, and I will show you faith from my works. You can say you have faith all you want, but James says the way that you're going to know my faith is real is you're going to see it through my works. It's going to be made evident through my works, okay? And he's showing you the connection between the two. You can't have faith and it not produce works, just like you can't have works that's enough for salvation without faith being the one producing it. So he's saying the two go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. I don't know if you've heard this phrase of where there's smoke, there's what? A fire. You know that phrase. So if you're driving the car and you see a big thing of smoke out in the distance, what's your first thought? Well, something's on fire over there, right? And so that's the kind of connection that you see with faith and works. Is that when you got fire, when you make a fire, it's going to produce smoke. There's no way of avoiding that. That's just science, okay? When you make a fire, it's going to produce smoke. Just like you can't have smoke just randomly on its own without it coming from a source, without it coming from fire. That's why they give you a chimney in your house. So that's a place, because they know if you build a fire, that's going to produce smoke, right? The two go hand in hand. That's the point James is making. When you have faith, it's going to produce works. The works are like the smoke that's coming from the fire. It's being produced from the fire. It's the fruit that's being produced. You can't have one without the other. All right? And he leads us in, because this introduces the next significant point here. In verse 19, he says, he starts off saying, you believe that God is one, you do well. And so he's about to address this flawed logic that is just all over our culture and our world today. We go on visits all the time and we ask people, we're like, hey, so, and what we do, we ask if if God were to ask you, why shall I let you into heaven, what would your answer be? And the reason we ask that is to kind of gauge and see if this salvation in their life is real, to see if this person's been saved or not, because their answer kind of reveals if that's true or not. And so when we ask them, if God were to ask you, why should I let you into heaven, what would your answer be? And like 9 times out of 10, the response is, well, I've believed in God my whole life, and I just try to be a really good person. And it's like, congrats, that's fantastic. But you're missing the point, and that's what James is getting at. He says, you believe that God is one, you do well. Because even the demons believe. The demons also believe, and they shudder. And so what is James telling you here? He says, belief is just a small, tiny part of what it means to follow Christ. Because even demons in hell that are separated from God forever believe that God exists. Even Satan himself acknowledges that God is real and he exists. And you know they're not getting into heaven. And so your belief that's not enough. I'm not saying that you don't believe in God. Kyle said not to believe in God because it's not good enough. That's not what I'm saying, okay? I'm saying belief by itself is not good enough because even the demons believe that. Even the demons believe that God exists. And that also introduces the subject of, well, I'll try to be a really good person. If you're trying to do be a really good person and basing your salvation off of again, that goes back to what Paul was addressing earlier, where he said you can't be good enough to earn salvation, can't be good enough to get into heaven. No one is good enough. No one at all. Okay? And there's a quote that I've heard when I was younger, and it's really convicting, and the quote is, there's going to be a lot of really good people in hell someday. Think about that. There's going to be a lot of really good people in hell someday. And that's really convicting. You're like, oh my God, like that seems really harsh. But think about it. There's people who spend their entire lives working hard to be a good person, but are doing this apart from Christ. And these are some of the sweetest, kindest people you'll ever meet. One of my friends in high school was a Mormon. And if you know anything about their beliefs, it's all based on works. It's trying to work their way into heaven. And even though they might claim that they follow Christ, they're far from it, and they're just as lost. They are just as lost as the rest of the world. And what's hard for me is because when I would go over to her house, and I would hang out with them all the time, and I would be around her family, and they are the sweetest people you will ever meet. They're so kind, and I'm like, these are just the kindest, sweetest people ever. But they are apart from Jesus. They are lost. And they're pursuing this religion that is leading them further and further away from Christ. It's not enough just to be a good person. It's not enough to just believe. The only thing that's going to get you into heaven is who? It's Jesus. And it's making Him Lord of your life. That's when salvation kicks. That's when a relationship kicks in and your eternity is secure, is when you make Jesus Lord of your life. Lord of your life. Not just the bits and pieces that you want Him to be Lord over. Okay? When I learned how to drive, my dad taught me how to drive, and he gave me I got this green truck, and when I first started working here, I was driving, it was like a 1993 Ford Ranger, green color, and it's old and kind of beat up, but I was pumped about it. It was my favorite car. I mean, driving that truck all the way up to the point where it literally was dead, okay, and there was a time where I just got my license. And you know how that is when a teenager gets their license. They're like, yeah, I want to drive everywhere. I'm the best driver in the world. I'm invincible, right? And so one day my mom takes the car to go do something for work or at a church thing. I can't remember what it was. But I'm at home with my dad, and I want to go to Guitar Center. And so we're like, hey, let's go to Guitar Center. This is before the one in Mesquite, so it's like way out in Plano. And so my dad asked me politely, he asked me, well, do you want to drive or do you want me to drive? And of course, my reaction is, well, my dad here has been driving much longer than I have. His whole job is pretty much driving places. He installs intercoms and central vacuums. If you need one of those things, talk to him after the service. But he's driving all over the place. So he has all this experience in driving. He knows how to drive, and he's a far better driver than I am. And I can sit there and be like, you know what, Dad? I believe that you're a better driver than me. But I think I'm a pretty good driver myself. So even though I believe that you're a better driver than me, I think I still want to do this. Do you think we're going to get to Guitar Center pretty safe? No, especially when I just got my license and I'm driving on highways I haven't driven on before. That's not a very great situation I want to be in, right? But I can tell him all I want. Dad, I believe you're a better driver. Than the way that he's going to know that The point I'm trying to get at is if I want to trust that my dad is a better driver than me and I want to get to where I need to be, I give him the keys. And to my truck, I'm saying, Dad, here's the keys, and I want you to get in the driver's seat because I recognize I'm not nearly as good of a driver as you are. I'm going to trust you with my truck, which even though I say it's my truck, you gave me this truck anyway, and I'm handing this over to you, and I want you to be in the driver's seat and take me where I need to be. And that's the picture of what it means to make Jesus Lord of your life, is you're giving Him the keys to your life. Everything, and recognize that the life that you even have right now is not yours. It's the one that Jesus has purchased from you, and God is the one that's giving you life right now. But when you make Him Lord of your life, you're handing your keys over to Him and saying, I trust that you're a better driver than me. And I'm going to stop trying to backseat drive. I'm going to stop trying to take control of the wheel. I'm going to make you one in the driver's seat because I know that you're going to take me where I need to be because you're the better driver. That's what it means to follow Christ. It's not about following Him whenever it's convenient to you. I'll drive here, but then you drive and going back and forth. I'm wanting you to drive the entire way. The entire way. And that's the point He's trying to get. It's not just about the belief and thinking that you're a good enough driver. You're making Him the driver of your life. But if you're still trying to take control of it, it's going to be a problem. All right? And so this leads into the last bit of what James is going to get into here in verses 20 through 25. And before we get into that, I'll share a story. When I got into college, I figured out that I had to take Spanish. Some of y'all kind of know my experience with that wasn't the best. But I didn't take Spanish in high school like a normal high school student would. I took sign language because it was like a blow-off class. And so I was like, I don't want to have to put in the work more than I have to. And so I took sign language instead of Spanish. But I showed up to my first Spanish class in college, and the teacher tells me at the beginning, he tells the whole class, he says, if you took Spanish in high school, and you can take this test and exempt from taking these classes in college. Does that make sense what we're doing? So if you took Spanish in high school, and you take and you pass this test, then you can exempt out of taking these other classes. Okay, which was unfortunate for me because I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm an idiot for not taking Spanish in high school. But I could walk up to him and be like, hey, I took Spanish in high school, but how are they going to know if I actually learned stuff in high school? How are they going to know? I got to pass the test. I can't exempt out of that. I can't do anything until I prove to them that I took this class, which I definitely didn't. But that's the way that they know that knowledge was real, that understanding was real, is if you pass the test. And this is a faith that James is going to get into in this next section here, in verse 20 through 25. He goes on, he says, foolish man, are you willing to learn that faith without works is useless? And he brings up a couple really strong examples here. He says, wasn't Abraham our father justified by works when he offered Isaac his son on the altar? You see that faith was active together with his works, and by works faith was perfected. So the scripture was fulfilled that says, Abraham believed God and it was credited to him for righteousness, and he was called God's friend. You see that a man is justified by works and not by faith alone. And in the same way, wasn't Rahab the prostitute also justified by works when she received the messengers and sent them out by a different route? And so he brings up these incredible examples here of people who were living out their faith. And they didn't just say they had faith in God. They didn't just claim to have this faith. They lived it out. They passed the test to prove that faith was real. You know the story of Abraham. We talked about this in Bible study a couple weeks ago, where God comes to Abraham and he says, hey, I'm going to give you a son. And this is Abraham in his old age. He hasn't been able to have kids his entire life. And God tells him, like, hey, I'm going to give you a son. And it's through this son that you're going to become the father of an entire nation, and you're going to have so many descendants that you can't even count them. Right? And so that's an incredible blessing that God is going to do in Abraham's life, and it's going to come through this one son. And so sure enough, Abraham, when he's like 100 years old, gives birth to, he gets the son Isaac. And so Isaac's there, and everything's going well. And you think, like, hey, this is awesome. Then God shows up later on. He says, hey, remember that son? And it's through this son that I'm going to make you the father of this incredible nation and all this stuff. Yeah, I'm going to need you to give that son back to me now. I'm going to need you to go sacrifice him. But if you read the story in Genesis, Abraham doesn't question it. Abraham doesn't argue. Abraham says, here I am. And when God tells him what to do, he immediately goes and does it. And it makes no sense whatsoever. Abraham's like, well, this is the son that God promised me, that I'm going to become the father of all these descendants. And how is that going to happen if he's telling me to get rid of him? That makes no sense. But Abraham doesn't question it. Abraham doesn't argue. Abraham obeys because his faith in God was much bigger than that. And he does that all the way. And what's interesting, if you read the story, is it was a 3-day journey. He's had 3 days to turn back around and be like, this is a terrible idea. Let's not do this. He's had 3 days, but his mind has already been made. I'm going to follow God even when it makes not a lick of sense to me. And he does it all the way up to the point where he's about to strike his son down, and God stops him and says, okay, I know that you're the real deal. I know your faith is real. Right? And that's where you get into verse 22 where he says his faith was active together with his works. And by his works, his faith was perfected. The way that he proved to God that his faith was real was through his works. That's when his works and his faith was perfected within that. The same thing happens with Rahab when the spies go into the promised land to scout out the land, and the Canaanites hear about that and they start searching for them, because they hear that they're threatening their land and stuff. And Rahab's living there, and she sees the spies, and she calls out. She's like, hey, I've heard about your God. I've heard about all these incredible things that your God has done. And the way that she shows her faith in God is by hiding these spies and protecting them, and knowing full well that she would probably get killed for doing that. They would get killed for doing that. Her whole family would probably get killed. She's showing how much she trusts God by hiding those spies in her house knowing the consequences of that. She's saying, even though this makes no sense for me to do this, and I'm pretty much killing myself by doing this, I'm going to trust in this God here, who I've heard about, who has done incredible things. I'm going to show him how much I trust him. That faith became real in that. And so we get into, and again, in verse 24, he says, you see, man is justified by works and not by faith alone. It's not just with your words. It's not just saying, hey, I'm a Christian. Yeah, my faith is real. It's made evident through your works, because the works are the fruit that's being produced through the Spirit. It's a result. It's evidence that that's real. The way you prove your faith is real is by living it out. The proof's in the actions. And he wraps it up here in verse 26. He says, for just as the body without the Spirit is dead, so also faith without works is dead. So this is, it seems like he's just repeating himself over and over again, but every time he's making this, he's trying to drive this point home further and further and further. It's not just about having faith. If you have an authentic, real faith and a relationship with God, it's going to be evident. Like the story with the dentist. When I went to the dentist, the way that people knew that they gave me numbing gels, they could see it. They could see the effects of it. I could walk out after it's over and be like, you know what, yeah, I had numbing gel. And they're like, well, I can't really tell because I'm talking like a normal person, right? It's the way that people know that I had that was they could see the effects of it. And that's the same thing with us. The way people know that we're Christians is not by us going around saying, hey, I'm a Christian. The way they know is because they can see it in our lives. They can see the fruit that's being produced, okay? And JT, you can go and make your way up here as we get ready for this last song. And so as we're wrapping up, you can close your Bibles and just listen to this part right here. Is what I want y'all to do is begin just evaluating your heart and evaluating your life and ask yourself, do people know that I'm a Christian because they can see it in my life, or do they only know that I'm a Christian because I've told them that? Y'all see the difference? Do people know that I'm a Christian because I just tell them I'm a Christian, or do they know I'm a Christian because they can see it in my life? Because if you're constantly having to convince somebody that you're a Christian, that's probably not a good thing, right? They should be able to see it. It should be evident. But what we like to do is we like to be Christians when it's convenient to us. It's easy to be a Christian in this building because we're surrounded by other Christians, right? But when we go out into our world and we go out to our homes and our works and our schools, wherever we're going, do people know that we're Christians? And they should be able to see it without us even speaking a word. They should see it in our life because the Spirit is producing that within us. And so the question is, what if you can't see the fruit? What if you can't see the evidence of God working in your life? That brings up about two possibilities. If you can't see the fruit of God working in your life, you can't see this fruit and the evidence of that, that means one of two things. The first means you don't have the Spirit. You cannot produce fruit if it's not being produced by the Spirit, okay? And if you don't have the Spirit, that means you're not saved. And so you might be convinced because you're doing a lot of good works and a lot of good things that, yeah, I'm a Christian, but if you're not seeing the actual effects of God moving in your life, it's because the Spirit's not there producing it. Which means you need Jesus. You need to make Him Lord of your life. You need to give the keys of your life over to Him and put Him in the driver's seat. Stop trying to take control because you cannot do it. I bring this up almost every time I preach with the definition of insanity because it just makes it so clear. When you're an insane person, the definition is doing the same thing over and over and over, expecting a different result out of it. And we keep making the same mistakes over and over and over again, thinking that something different's going to happen, and it's not. The thing that needs to change is us. We need to give our lives over to Christ, and that means giving Him full control over everything. Everything you eat, everything you drink, everything you say, everything you do, everything in your life is under His control because He's a better driver than you. Plain and simple. So this morning, some of you in this room know that Jesus isn't in the driver's seat. You know you need Jesus to be in the driver's seat. And if that's you this morning, come before. We're going to have people up here who are just dying to talk to you and want to help you with this and help you understand what does it look like to make Jesus Lord of your life. The other reason that you might not be able to see fruit is because you have thorns and weeds that are choking that fruit out in your life. Which those thorns and those thistles and those things, that's our sin. That starts growing in our lives, and when we're sinning, it's producing thorns and it's choking that fruit and it's keeping it from growing. And if you're having trouble seeing evidence of God moving in your life, that might be a strong possibility that you have some sin that you're holding on to and you're unwilling to let go of. And this morning, you got to let go of it. Because you are not going to be able to see God move. You cannot expect to see God move in your life until you remove those thorns out of your life. And it's not going to be comfortable. He's ripping those thorns, pruning those things out of your life because they don't need to be there. And you need to trust that He knows what He's doing. He knows better than you. Even though it feels good. That's the problem is sin feels really good and it makes sense to us. But we get so blinded by that as it's choking this fruit and it's keeping God from doing what He desires to do in your life. It's keeping you from pursuing Him with all that you are. A true Christian is determined by an authentic relationship with Him. And that relationship is evident by spending time with Him every single day. Is standing up and serving. Is living this out in your life. And the thing is, it should not be a burden. It should not be a burden to show up to church on Sunday morning and go to Bible study. That shouldn't be a burden. That should be something you're excited to do. It shouldn't be a burden to wake up in the morning and spend time with God, even if that means you have to wake up earlier. That shouldn't be a burden. It shouldn't be a burden to step up and start serving when you see needs all over our building and all over our community. That should not be a burden. Because if you have tasted and seen that God is good, you should have no other response except to want more of it. And want more of it. And want more of it. But if it's a burden, if you're just dreading showing up to church, that's showing that there's probably some fruit that's choking out there's thorns that are choking out that fruit in your life. And you need to remove those things so that you can have a fresh perspective and understanding of what it looks like to follow Christ. Because, again, I used this example before of eating cinnamon powdered donuts, right, from Mrs. Baird's. I love cinnamon powdered donuts from Mrs. Baird's. But when I get the package, I get a full package. I can't eat just one donut. I try to just eat one. But as soon as I taste it, it just lights my whole life up. I'm like, this is so good. And I want more of it. And I want more of it. I keep eating and I keep eating. And this is probably terrible I'm sharing this, but then the bag is empty. But you'll see the point. That's how it should be with God. You should taste and see that He's good and not be able to stop wanting more of Him. Wanting more and wanting more and wanting more. Being filled by Him. And that's only going to happen if you give Him control and you let go of what's comfortable to you, what you're holding on to, the sin that you are chasing after. And that could be being distracted by the idols in your life, which could be work. That could be school. That could be family. That could be friends. That can be relationships. That can be money. Whatever it is that you're putting up at a higher priority than God, you need to let go of it. Because God is so much more important than those things. He is so much more satisfying than those things, more fulfilling. And it's only through Him that you're going to experience this. And it shouldn't be a burden. You should long for this more than anything. And some of us in here are at our point where we're in a situation that makes no sense to us. We're facing some hardcore battles and storms in our lives, and it makes no sense. And you just need to demonstrate some true, authentic faith. Don't cave in and don't give up just because it's hard, just because it doesn't make sense to you. Don't give up on God just because it doesn't make sense to you. Show Him how much you trust Him. Say and come before Him this morning and say, God, even though it makes no sense whatsoever what's going on in my life, I trust that you are better, I trust that you are bigger, and I trust that you know what you're doing. That's the kind of faith that Abraham lived out. God told him to kill his son, and Abraham didn't question it. He said, it makes no sense, but I'm going to do it because I trust that you know what you're doing. Some of you this morning need to do that. You need to come, and we don't have like steps like in the sanctuary, but come on your hands and knees and show God how real you are. Say, God, I want to come before you on my hands and knees and saying, I trust you. I trust you. Help me trust you. Which means in order for you to be able to fully trust God, you got to let go of what's comfortable. You got to let go of what makes sense to you because it's not going to make sense. Jesus asked Peter to walk on water. That makes no sense. But that didn't stop Peter from doing it. Peter didn't hold on to the comfort of the boat. He got out of the boat and walked after Jesus. And that's what you need to do this morning. And so come forward, as we sing this last song, come forward and say, God, I want to trust you. I want to live that out. Help me trust you, even when it makes no sense. If you're lost and you need to make Jesus Lord of your life, come forward. Come talk to me. Come talk to Robert. We would love to talk with you about that. Or if you have sin in your life that you know you need to get rid of, don't leave here until it's dealt with. And it's going to take some serious faith. And what doesn't make sense is coming forward in front of a ton of people and standing in front of them and acknowledging that God's moving in your life. That takes boldness. And that's what real faith, if you want to show God how real you are, come forward this morning and show Him. I'm serious. And I don't care what anyone in this room thinks of me. I don't care what anyone at home thinks of me.
I don't care what the whole world thinks about me. All I care about is what you're doing in my life, and I want more of you. Make that happen this morning. God, I pray that you show up in this room right now. God, it's so easy to say that we're Christians. It's so easy to say that we love you. But God, help us not to just say this in our words. Help us to show you. Help us to have the kind of faith that's producing this work within us. The evidence that this faith is real. Help us to see that in our lives this morning. Whatever we're dealing with, God, I pray that we would not hold on to our chairs, hold on to what's comfortable, but to come before you this morning and let go of all of that, saying that you are more important. May we let go this morning and may we trust you, whether that's for the first time, whether that's just running back to you because we've been straying away, or just being reminded that you are good even in the midst of our storm, God. May we come forward and may we respond to you. May we not ignore you. May we not leave here the same way we walked in like we do so often. May we give all that we are to you. So God, I pray that you consume us from the inside out. Consume every thought and desire to transform us to be more like you and to want to be with you because you are good. We have tasted and seen that you are good and may we want more of you, God. So as we stand and sing this last song, you respond however God's calling you to do.